A lot of us grew up with the Charlie Brown Christmas story. I did a little research on it because far back as I can remember, that was just a staple for Christmas. And it just, even then there just wasn't as many distractions because you had 3 TV channels, 4 if you count the education one. So you kind of flipped around for Frosty the Snowman, and Charlie Brown Christmas was a staple. Apparently, it was released on December 9th, 1965, and it was doomed to fail. Nobody thought it was going to make it. There were a lot of marketing issues at the time. Peanuts, as the series in the comic strip was going, was very popular, and it was on the move. But the way they did this particular story and the way they wrote this, there was drama, and there was tension, and there was conflict, and there's a biblical message in there. And it challenges the status quo of what we might call commercialism or consumerism or shallowness. And they didn't think it would do well, but as it was, they released it, and it turned out, as we now know, a big hit. I actually had the privilege, I put this on the blog, I think, I had the privilege of being like a 7th grade play, and got to be the Linus, which is that's the money shot. If you get Linus, I mean, that line right there, just, there it is. And for me, I looked at the lines that were on there, and I thought, oh my, I mean, it was like 6 lines. But it felt like the Declaration of Independence when I was studying for that thing. And I had the privilege of playing Linus in that. And it's interesting because I remember, even at that time, it's such a conflicting time in my life, that I was speaking something true, that there was just something good and whole and accurate about that line that Linus is basically reading out of the book of Luke. It's the Christmas story. And they've wrapped it in this peanut story and just sort of embedded that message to say that there is more than meets the eye. Now, I'm not against Christmas. I'm not proclaiming a message that says, well, we should shun all the lights and all the purchases and all that stuff. It's not the church versus culture concept that I'm trying to convey. In fact, we have to live in the culture, and there are good things about that bring happiness and joy, a sense of awe for the kids, and an innocence and an anticipation and an energy about the holidays that incorporates many good things. And so we're not by any means shunning the concept of Christmas and going to Tanger Outlet or wherever you go. But it is about paying attention to the main thing and giving the emphasis at the end of the day, whether it's the kids or our own stories and how we look at Christmas, about what it's really all about. It comes around every year. And on the church calendar, we barely get the trees and stuff put up before we're talking about the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. It's 4.5 months apart usually, something like that. And so it moves around pretty quick in that sense. But this is a time to not just reflect back on our stories and what Christmas might have meant during that innocent and awe-inspiring time. It's about the present hope of what God is telling us in the larger story. We read out of 2 sections today, and one was the Old Testament and one was the New Testament. And I hope I've done this well. The last couple of years, what I have tried to tell stories about up here it's the larger story. It's the Old Testament speaking towards the New Testament. That God, long ago, through his prophets and through the writings of the ancient days, was telling us that good things were coming. And he used the story of Israel and all those things that go with it. But let's don't lose sight of the fact that he's speaking to us in there. And when he's proclaiming that there's an anointed one to come, hundreds of years out from the prophecy, he's talking about sending his son, leaving heaven and coming to earth as Emmanuel, God with us. And that seems so inconceivable if you stop and think about it. So inconceivable, in fact, that those who studied it for centuries and who had immersed themselves in the Word of God from the Old Testament did not recognize it. It was so impossible and so unfathomable that God would come in flesh to his own creation. They didn't recognize him. It didn't add up. It didn't make sense that a holy God would step into the mess of what earth was and what humanity had become. But there it is, and there it was. And as God says it in Isaiah, there's a line or a couple lines in there that says, a bruised reed he will not crush. A smoldering wick he will not snuff out. Because it's in the tender compassion of a loving God that he comes to us. Not to judge, not to crush, not to shame, not to accuse, but to meet us at the point of our greatest need, to find us in our mess and to call us out. This is where we find ourselves. When we go back to the story and the larger story, I've done it time and again where I remind us that the fall was where it all went bad. But before the fall, before the Genesis story of Adam and Eve, we can go to Revelation, and there's a story there that talks about war in heaven, that the captain of the heavenly armies, who was known as Lucifer, once walked with God. That he was in the presence of God, and that all was well in heaven, and there was laughter and joy and the movement of the Trinity, but something came in called pride. And when Lucifer got hold of pride, he wanted to be God himself. And so we read in Revelation that there was war in heaven, and that at some point that they were cast out, cast to the earth. And that precedes the Genesis creation. And this is important to know because that's what's there when the Lord breathes over the formless earth. And as the story goes, and I'm not debating science and billions of years. This is not that either. But we take the story because it makes sense in such a way that we don't have to say, was it an apple or a pomegranate, right? We're splitting hairs. We don't have to say, was it 5,000 years ago, 7,000, or 4 billion. There's a story that doesn't have to be so much accurate as much as it is true. So when we look at the Genesis creation and the Lord hovered over the earth, and it was formless, and he breathed on it, and light came, and the developmental model just unfolded with vegetation and plants and animals, and then eventually Adam and then Eve. And we don't know how long that was, but there was a period there where Adam and Eve reigned on earth to name the animals, to basically govern everything. But in the moment of deception, or the process of deception, in which the enemy knows that he can't beat God, so he'll go after the very thing that is the heart of God, his creation, his image on earth. Then he goes after Eve. And the deception hits, and the apple falls, and Satan laughs. And all that we owned and possessed and were called to do was given over in deception. Satan holds the keys at that time. And God, even in his mercy, comes and banishes Adam and Eve and humanity from the garden. But it is an act of mercy, more so than punishment, because in that garden is the tree of life. And if man was to eat of the tree of life, he would live in an eternal state of damnation, alienated from God. So the best thing to do is to close the doors and run him out. And he does, and provides. So we get thousands of years of history where God is pursuing man, and we get the nation of Israel, who is his chosen. And then you read about it. I won't go through the whole Old Testament. We're short on time. I would also expose my ignorance in certain areas, so we'll definitely avoid that. But the story is there. And it is a projection that even as the gates closed and the cherubim were placed at the entrance to Eden to keep man out, that on the horizon was a shadow. And that shadow was in the form of a cross. That the very tree that Jesus would create would be the one that God would be nailed to. But he would come for us. He would not leave us in a state of alienation, nor allow the evil one, Satan, to be a victor. We grow up, we show up in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, and we sit in a church or a place, or we read the Bible, and we go, okay, what about this mythic story that you tell? How does this apply to me today? What about it? What do I do about it? John Eldredge talks a little bit about the condition that we sometimes find ourselves in and the dilemma that God is in. Because we come to this conscious awareness of where our story picks up centuries and thousands of years later. And we all have to make that decision too. At some point, we got to decide what we're going to do about God and all that he has promised. the conditions that he seems to have attached, and the methods by which he goes about his business. We all have to reconcile that. Whether we're here in North Charleston, whether we're in Israel or Antarctica or someplace in the Middle East, it's been going on for thousands of years. Every human has to ask and answer that question in some form or fashion. And here's kind of where we find ourselves. John Eldredge says this. He said, it's titled, Something Up His Sleeve. He says, rescuing the human heart is the hardest mission in the world. The dilemma of the story is this. We don't know if we want to be rescued. We're so enamored with our small stories and our false gods. We're so bound up in our addictions and our self-centeredness and take it for granted unbelief that we don't even know how to cry out for help. And the evil one has no intention of letting his captives walk away scot-free. He seduces us, deceives us, assaults us, whatever it takes to keep us in darkness. Like a woman bound to an affair from which she cannot get free, like a man so corrupted he no longer knows his own name, the human race is captive in the worst way possible. We are captives of the heart. Hebrews says their hearts are always going astray. God is filled with the jealousy of a wounded lover. He's been betrayed time and again. And the challenge God faces is rescuing a people who have no idea how captive they really are, no idea how desperate they are. We know we long for Eden, but we hesitate to give ourselves back to God and abandon trust. We are captivated by the lies of our enemy. But God has something up his sleeve. And that something up his sleeve is what the Christmas story is all about. God knows us because he created us. He knows our condition and our situation. He knows our story. He knows the assault that's been upon our heart and the wounds that we've taken in doing life here. And he has not endorsed those wounds. Instead, he has wept with them. He has bled in those wounds. And so, knowing that we do not have the ability or the inclination or both to come to him, he has come to us. He has come to us as Emmanuel, God with us. And he doesn't come in a storm. He doesn't come on a chariot. He doesn't come on the waves of some victorious, triumphal entry. He comes as a vulnerable, anonymous, a nobody baby, born through the womb of another woman, in a dank, dungy stable. He leaves his place on high, and he steps into the dirtiest, dankest place, and will meet us here. When Jesus grows up, we see the stories of who he hangs out with. He doesn't go in and proclaim himself in such a way that he asks everybody to bow down. Instead, after doing his time in the wilderness to defeat Satan as a human, he steps out of that victory and he hangs out with sinners and what they call tax collectors. Don't lose the thing about tax collectors is, oh, well, I'm not one of those. They're exploiters. They're betrayers. They were taxing their own people. They were pocketing half the money. They were charging more than they needed to. Right there, their very own Jewish people under captivity were exploiting their fellow brothers and sisters. So all of the character defects, all of the sin is wrapped up in a label called tax collector, but it doesn't have to be a tax collector if you know where I'm going here. That's who he hangs out with. God with us comes to that. And he doesn't demand. He says, follow me. Come. And he earns their trust. This group of cynical, distrusting, half-loyal, half-baked, up in the moment, whatever's feeling good at the time, line up behind this guy. And yeah, at the end, everybody leaves him in the moment of crisis. But many hang on. 10 lepers were healed in one miracle. One came back and said, thank you. That's a 10% return on investment. Today's stock market would say that's darn good. A minister would say that's too much work for a little return. But Jesus saw enough there. Healed 10, get one back. See, the invitation is still there. The gift is free. The invitation to follow lingers. I think, this story last year. I'm going to tell it again because it's a Christmas story. And it's actually titled An Angel's Story. It comes out of a Max Lucado book. And it goes like this. I'm going to move between different characters. Bear with me. Gabriel. Just the sound of my king's voice stirred my heart. I left my post at the entryway and stepped into the throne room. To my left was the desk on which sat the book of life. Ahead of me was the throne of Almighty God. I entered the circle of unceasing light, folded my wings before me to cover my face, and knelt before him. Yes, my Lord. You have served the kingdom well. You are a noble messenger. Never have you flinched in your duty. Never have you flagged in zeal. I bowed my head, basking in the words, whatever you ask, I'll do 1,000 times over, my king, I promised. Of that I have no doubt, dear messenger. His voice assumed a solemnity I'd never heard him use. But your greatest work lies ahead of you. Your next assignment is to carry a gift to earth. Behold. I lifted my eyes to see a necklace, a clear vial on a golden chain dangling from his extended hand. My father spoke earnestly. Though empty, this vial will soon contain my greatest gift. Handing me the necklace, he explained, this vial will contain the essence of myself, a seed to be placed in the womb of a young girl. Her name is Mary. She lives among my chosen people. The fruit of the seed is the Son of God. Take it to her. But how will I know her? I asked. Don't worry, you will. I could not comprehend God's plan, but my understanding was not essential. My obedience was. I lowered my head, and he draped a chain around my neck. Amazingly, the vial was no longer empty. It glowed with light. Jesus. Tell her to call my son Jesus. The Father whispered to me. I heard him as if by my side. Go, Gabriel, and tell Mary. On a wave of worship I flew, this time alone. I circled through the clouds and over the ground. Below me was the city where Mary was born. The Father was right. I knew her in an instant. Her heart had no shadow. Her soul was as pure as any I've seen. I made the final descent. Mary. I kept my voice so low as not to startle her. She turned but saw nothing. Then I realized I was invisible to her. I waved my wings before my body and incarnated. She covered her face at the light and shrank into the protection of the doorway. Don't be afraid, I urged. The minute I spoke, she looked up towards the sky. Again, I was amazed. I praised my Father for his wisdom. Her heart is so flawless, so willing. Greetings. God be with you. Her eyes widened and she turned as if to run. Mary, you have nothing to fear. You have found favor with God. You will become pregnant and give birth to a son and call his name Jesus. He will be great. He will be called the Son of the Highest. The Lord God will give him the throne of his father David. He will rule Jacob's house forever, no end ever to his kingdom. Though she was listening, she was puzzled. But how? I've never slept with a man. Before I spoke, I looked up into the heavens. The Father was standing, giving me his blessing. I continued, the Holy Spirit will come upon you, the power of the highest hover over you. Therefore, the child you bring to earth will be called Holy, Son of God. Nothing you see is impossible with God. Mary looked at me, then up into the sky. And for a long time she gazed into the blueness, so long that I too looked up. Did she see the angels? Did the heavens open? I do not know. But I do know when I look back at her, she was smiling. Yes, I see it all now. I am the Lord's maid, ready to serve. Let it be with me just as you say. And as she spoke, a light appeared in her womb. The king walked over and reached for the book. He turned it toward Lucifer and commanded, come, deceiver, read the name of the one who will call your bluff. Read the name of the one who will storm your gates. Satan rose slowly off his haunches. Like a wary wolf, he walked a wide circle toward the desk until he stood before the volume and read the word. Emmanuel, he muttered to himself, then spoke in a tone of disbelief. God with us? For the first time, the hooded head turned squarely toward the face of the Father. No, not even you would do that. Not even you would go so far. You've never believed me, Satan. But Emmanuel, the plan is bizarre. You don't know what it's like on earth. You don't know how dark I've made it, how putrid it is, how evil. It's mine, proclaimed the king. And I will reclaim what is mine. I will become flesh. I will feel what my creatures feel. I will see what they see. But what of their sin? I will bring mercy. What of their death? I will give life. Satan stood speechless, and God spoke. I love my children. Love does not take away the beloved's freedom, but love takes away fear. And Emmanuel will leave behind a tribe of fearless children. They will not fear you or your hell. Satan stepped back at the thought. His retort was childish. They will too. I will take away all sin. I will take away death. Without sin and without death, you have no power. Around and around in a circle, Satan paced, clenching and unclenching his wiry fingers. When he finally stopped, he asked a question that even I was thinking. Why? Why would you do this? And the Father's voice was deep and soft. Because I loved them. We were a wreath of light around the stable, a necklace of diamonds around the structure. Every angel had been called from his post for the coming, even Michael. None doubted God would, but no one knew how he could fulfill this promise. I've heated the water. No need to yell, Joseph. I hear you fine. Mary would have heard had Joseph even whispered. The stable was even smaller than Joseph had imagined, but the innkeeper was right. It was clean. I started to clear out the sheep and cow, but Michael stopped me. The Father wants all of creation to witness the moment. Mary cried out and gripped Joseph's arm with one hand and a feed trough with the other. The thrust in her abdomen lifted her back, and she leaned forward. Is it time? Joseph asked. She shot back a glance, and he had his answer. Within moments, the awaited one was born. I was privileged to have a position close to the couple, only a step behind Michael. We both gazed into the wrinkled face of the infant. Joseph had placed hay in a feed trough, giving Jesus his first bed. All of God was in the infant. Light circled his face and radiated from his tiny hands. The very glory I had witnessed in his throne room now burst through his skin. I felt we should sing, but did not know what. We had no song. We had no verse. We had never seen the sight of God and a baby. And when God had made a star, our words had roared. When he had delivered his servants, our tongues had flown with praise. Before his throne, our songs never ended. But what do you sing to God in a feed trough? In that moment, a wonderful thing happened. As we looked at the baby Jesus, the darkness lifted. Not the darkness of the night, but the darkness of the mystery. Heaven's enlightenment engulfed the legions. And our minds were filled with the truth we had never known before. We became aware for the first time of the Father's plan to rescue those who bear his name. It's a cool story, isn't it? It gives visualization to what could be going on behind the scenes. And there's a lot going on behind the scenes. A lot. I know I have really discounted or not seen or not quite understood all that God has done. I have to be renewed in that every day. I'm not one who's great on hanging on to blessings. I tend to focus more on problems. And yet, if I can just slow down enough, if I can listen and ask, he'll come and remind me what's important. He also lets me know who I am. And that's important. Because who I am is a recipient of that gift. That gift of Emmanuel, God with us, came to me. Not all at once. I got it in pieces. But I got it just the same. And it changed my life. In fact, it seems that God was rather anonymous through most of it until I realized who he was. And so we come back to the meaning of Christmas. What Linus says, that's what Christmas is all about, Charlie Brown. It's about a gift. And what we know about a gift is we don't earn a gift. It's given to us. A real gift is given to us without strings attached. A real gift is not sought after. It's brought to us. And sometimes we don't know we need that gift or the meaning behind that gift until we actually receive it, if we're ready to receive it. And so what God seems to have done here is he has come after us, each and every one of us. That we're forced to deal with a question, and sometimes, yeah, it's rather intrusive. And his question is, what are you going to do about me? What are you going to do about me when I want all of you, all of your heart, when I call you out of your darkness, out of your position, out of your captivity, call you out of your death, and out of the destiny that your enemy has for you. And I call you into a new life. And in exchange, I want all of you. What do we do with that? Sounds like strings, don't it? Sounds like maybe our dignity is being questioned, or perhaps our power and control and need for security and pleasure is being put on the altar, and we got to make some decisions. I know for a long time I said, I'll get back with you on that one, right? Because a lot of times I don't always know what's on that altar. But when it becomes apparent, I have to look at it and I got to make a decision. And why is he asking this of me? Because can't he just sort of take care of things? Well, I would say that what I've come to find out, I think is true, is that he is respecting my dignity. Because he says, I have good things for you, and if you will let go of that, you can pick this up. You can pick up hope and freedom and peace. And you will know these things because you have let go of the things that hold you in bondage. Even though they appear to provide you security, they are crushing your heart. So he asks everything. And like I said, sometimes in pieces, sometimes all at once. And we're forced to decide, what are we going to do about you? Now, sometimes I think my fear has been, well, if I don't answer this question right now, he won't come back. And for some people, that's true because they get killed before they get to make that choice. They die. Or their hearts get so hardened that they can't even move out of the immobilization that is their bondage. They want to, but they can't do it. Their hearts have said no too many times, and they don't even recognize the king when he comes into the room. But for most of us, and I think it is a process before we get to either place, that God comes back, and he comes back again, and he's relentless. He's relentless about pursuing us, holding out to the very end, wanting us to give us all, give all of us to him. So we come to that place of what we're going to do about this truth. What does it mean to me? What does it mean to you? This truth about Christmas, this gift, this Emmanuel, God with us, what are you going to do about that? My encouragement in the quiet time that we have after communion is to look at areas in your life that you might be convicted about. Opportunities to maybe explore more. How you might look at adjusting your goals and priorities in life around this very truth that Emmanuel does come among us and he calls us home. And he calls us to life with him here and now. This isn't just an eternal offer, though that's enough. This is life to the fullest. And he has called us to his purposes, to carry this love and this light to other people, to be a light in the world, to live a certain way and to let go of the things that hold us captive. My way over here, I was cutting through West Ashley and I went by, there's a commercial car wash going, the ones where the guys are out there doing 9 o'clock in the morning, man, they're packed. And I remember Sundays didn't mean any different than Mondays or Tuesdays. What Sundays meant and can still mean is I'm going to go out and polish the golden idol, the one I make payments on. Right? I know. I don't judge them because I know exactly how I get drawn into that. The big shiny things, the things that are my idols that no, it's not my, oh yeah, I spend my time, I spend my money, I spend my thoughts. What is it then, really? Or my reputation, how people see me and receive me, who they think I am, and the story I've written that says, see, I'm really good in these areas. These are my competencies, and I will cover up what I think are my vulnerabilities so you don't really know who I am. It's all right here. This is what I want you to see. That's a lot of work to hold all that up all the time. It's my finances or my relationships or whatever. It's those areas that I have taken something sacred and I've turned it into, well, what humans do. We were made to worship. We were wired to worship. It's not that we got a problem worshiping. We got a problem where we direct that worship. And those areas of power and security and pleasure are the big traps for me. So what am I going to do about that in terms of my priorities? What am I going to do about that looking ahead next year? That's the cool thing about Christmas. It kind of comes around to that New Year's resolution time, right? A reset on the calendar. But it doesn't have to be a hollow resolution. This is a time where many of you I have been talking to for 2 years. Some of you gotten on more recent than that. That's fine. But the story's been the same. Go back and listen to the messages we recorded. I say the same thing every other Sunday. That God loves you, that He calls you out, that He has come for you, and He has good things for you. And the big message is, will you let go of what's holding you back and take it? That's the message. Sometimes I paint the larger story. Sometimes I come in and tell the smaller story. But it's the same thing. So my hope, and for me too, is that I remember what Christmas is all about. That it is the gift, God with us.